The ferry's hum vibrated through the railing under my fingers as I stared at the island of Santerosa growing larger on the horizon. It was stunning, like something out of a dream. White sand beaches meeting emerald jungle, the kind of place you'd expect to see on the cover of a travel magazine. But as perfect as it seemed, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all wrong. "Adrian," Mike's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. He grinned at me, his tan and effortless charm, making him look like an ad for luxury vacations. "Quit zoning out, man. You're supposed to be relaxing." I forced a smile. "Are you fine?" "Sure you are." He clapped me on the shoulder, his laugh as easy as ever. "Trust me, a few days here, and you'll forget everything." Julia, Mike's girlfriend, was further down the ferry, adjusting her camera and snapping shots of the island. "The light here is insane," she murmured, more to herself than to us. Nina lounged near the bar, already holding a drink. "I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking I might just stay. Forget work. Forget everything." She laughed, though something in her voice didn't match her carefree words. The truth was I didn't belong here. Mike had dragged me along, convinced that this perfect getaway would snap me out of the rut I'd been in since my divorce. He was wrong. The problems I carried weren't the kind you could leave behind, no matter how far you traveled. The ferry docked at a weathered wooden pier, and the resort staff greeted us with smiles too wide to be genuine. They draped fragrant garlands around our necks and pressed chilled drinks into our hands. A young woman handed me mine, her dark eyes locking onto mine for a moment too long. "Welcome to Santerosa," she said warmly. "We hope your stay will be unforgettable." Her words sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. The resort was everything Mike had promised. Private villas hidden among lush greenery, an infinity pool that seemed to spill into the horizon, and a bar stocked with more alcohol than anyone could reasonably drink. Everyone else seemed immediately at ease, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the staff was watching me. That evening, while the others celebrated our arrival, I wandered to the beach alone. The rhythmic crash of waves was soothing, and for a moment I thought I might actually feel peace here. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind brushing through the palms. But as I stood there, listening, I realized it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, faint, and melodic, like someone humming just out of earshot. I turned, scanning the beach. It was empty. "Get it together, Adrian," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. The island was already getting to me. When I returned to the villa, the others were still up. Mike was charming the bartender, Julia was editing photos, and Nina was deep into her second or third cocktail. I didn't tell them about the sound. It felt personal, like it had been meant for me alone. The next morning, Mike had us all up early for a guided jungle tour. Our guide, Miguel, was wiry and sharp-eyed, his weathered face betraying a lifetime on the island. He led us deep into the jungle, pointing out medicinal plants and rare birds with a practiced ease. But when we stopped by a clearing marked with ancient carvings, his tone changed. "This island," Miguel said, gesturing toward the carvings, "is alive. It sees you. It knows what you carry." His words hit me harder than I expected. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Miguel's gaze flicked to me, piercing and unrelenting. "The island chooses who stays, who leaves, and who is never seen again." Mike laughed, brushing him off. "Come on, man. Don't scare the tourists." Miguel didn't laugh. His eyes lingered on me for a moment longer before he turned and led us deeper into the jungle. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of waves outside the villa was constant, but underneath it, I could hear the faint humming again. It was softer this time, almost inviting. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of a room filled with mirrors. Each reflection showed a version of myself, some younger, some older, but all staring back at me with hollow eyes. In one of the mirrors, I wasn't alone. A figure stood behind me, its face obscured. I jolted awake, my heart racing. The villa was silent, but the whispers lingered in my mind like an echo. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. The sunlight spilling through the blinds felt too bright, too harsh, as though the island itself was trying to push me out of bed. I groaned and grabbed the phone, a message from Julia. Breakfast by the pool. Don't take forever. By the time I joined them, the others were already halfway through their meals. Julia sat in her chair, scrolling through her camera, muttering about angles and lighting. Nina sipped her coffee, staring out at the jungle with a distant look in her eyes. But Mike wasn't there. "Where's Mike?" I asked, sliding into an empty chair. Nina shrugged, her usual energy dimmed. "He didn't come back to the villa last night. I figured he was with you." "He wasn't." Julia lowered her camera, frowning. "He wasn't in the villa? I thought he went back there after we left the bar." Nina set her coffee down a little too hard. "Knowing Mike, he probably passed out somewhere. It's not like this place is big enough to get lost." Her words didn't comfort me. The staff's behavior the day before, Miguel's cryptic warning, it all felt too strange to ignore. I excused myself after breakfast and went to the front desk. The receptionist greeted me with the same polished smile as before, but when I asked about Mike, her expression didn't waver. "I'm sure your friend is enjoying himself," she said, her tone infuriatingly calm. "Santerosa has a way of helping guests find what they're looking for." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my patience fraying. She tilted her head, her smile growing slightly wider. "Relax, Mr. Adrian. Everything will be fine." Her words didn't settle me. They felt more like a threat. By lunchtime, we'd searched the entire resort, every villa, the pool, the bar, even the spa. Mike was nowhere. "We need to call someone," I said, pacing the length of the dining area. "And tell them what?" Julia snapped, frustration creeping into her voice. "That Mike decided to go off on his own? He does this all the time?" "This feels different," I said, stopping to face her. "You don't feel it?" Julia hesitated, glancing at Nina. "Feel what?" "The island," Nina said softly. She hadn't spoken much all morning, and now her voice was barely audible. "It's like it's alive." Julia rolled her eyes, trying to hide her unease. "Great. Now you're both buying into that guy's nonsense. Miguel was just trying to scare us." But I wasn't so sure. That night, we joined a small group of tourists for a bonfire on the beach. The flames licked at the night sky, and the sound of waves filled the heavy silence between me, Nina, and Julia. The other guests seemed oblivious, their laughter carrying over the crackle of burning wood. "We shouldn't have come here," Nina muttered, her gaze fixed on the fire. I didn't argue. Then, through the distant crash of the waves, I heard it again. "Adrian." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was faint, like a breeze brushing past my ear, but it was unmistakable. "What is it?" Nina asked, noticing my reaction. I heard him," I stammered. "Mike." He called my name. Julia groaned. "You're imagining things." No, I stood abruptly, my heart pounding. "He's out there." "Adrian, wait." Nina called after me, but I was already moving toward the jungle. The beach gave way to thick undergrowth, the cool sand replaced by damp earth and twisting roots. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy above, leaving the jungle shrouded in shadow. "Mike!" I shouted, my voice breaking the eerie stillness. For a moment, there was no response. Then I heard it again. "Adrian." The voice was closer now, and I pushed forward, my hands trembling as I shoved branches out of my way. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing. The air here was heavier, colder, and the ground beneath my feet felt solid and unnatural. At the center of the clearing stood a figure. "Mike!" I whispered, stepping closer. But as I approached, I realized it wasn't Mike. The figure was tall and thin, its outline shimmering like heat waves rising off asphalt. Its head tilted slightly, as though studying me. The closer I got, the more my stomach twisted. It wasn't human. Not anymore. "Adrian," the voice came from the figure, distorted and hollow. I stumbled back, my chest tight with fear. "Mike!" I tried again, though I knew it was pointless. The figure didn't move. Its presence was suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. I stood there, frozen, the sound of my pounding heart filling the silence. When I finally made it back to the beach, Julia and Nina were waiting for me, their faces pale. "What did you see?" Nina asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to speak. By morning, Julia was gone. Her villa was untouched, her camera still sitting on the bedside table, her clothes neatly folded. But there was no sign of her anywhere. Two people don't just disappear, Nina said, pacing the length of the dining area. We need to leave. Now. We can't, I said, my voice heavy. There's no ferry until the end of the week, and the staff. I trailed off, knowing there was no use arguing. They know something, Nina hissed, her voice sharp. They're part of this. I didn't respond. She was right. The staff had been eerily calm throughout it all, their smiles unwavering, their reassurances hollow. The whispers grew louder that night, threading through the jungle like a living thing. I stayed awake, clutching the edge of the bed, as the sound of my name echoed faintly in the darkness. Adrian. The next morning, I woke to the whispers. They were louder now, filling the villa like a living presence. For a moment, I stayed frozen under the sheets, hoping they would stop. But they didn't. I forced myself to get up, the air feeling heavier with every step. The villa was eerily silent, and Nina was already waiting for me in the kitchen. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She's gone, Adrian, Nina said, her voice flat. I didn't need to ask who she meant. Julia. Her camera was still on the nightstand, her phone charging by the bed. But she was nowhere to be found. It was the same as Mike. Nina paced the room, her hands clenching and unclenching. We need to leave. Now. I don't care how. We can't stay here. I know, I said, though I had no idea how we were going to escape. The staff wouldn't help us. They barely reacted when we told them Julia was gone, offering the same maddening reassurance. Santerosa helps everyone find their way. What the hell did that mean? By midday, we decided to confront Miguel. He was the only person who seemed to understand the island, or at least its dangers. We found him at the docks, mending a fishing net. He looked up as we approached, his expression unreadable. Two of our friends are gone, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike and Julia. We need to know what's happening. Miguel sighed, setting the net aside. I warned you, he said simply. Santerosa sees what you carry. It takes what it is owed. What the hell does that mean? Nina snapped, her voice rising. Miguel's gaze shifted to her, then to me. The island isn't just a place. It's alive. It sees your fears, your guilt, your secrets, and it doesn't let everyone leave. That's insane, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Miguel's expression hardened. Think about your friends. What were they hiding? What were they running from? My stomach twisted. Mike always laughed the loudest, the life of the party. But I knew he was covering something, a broken relationship he refused to talk about. And Julia, with her quiet intensity, never once mentioned her family. Miguel's voice dropped. Santerosa takes the darkness you bring with you. If you want to survive, you need to face it. All of it. What if I don't? I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, Nina and I barricaded the door to the villa. The whispers had grown louder, wrapping around the walls like a storm. I could feel them pressing against my thoughts, pulling at memories I had tried to bury. I can't do this, Nina said, pacing the room. I can't. You're not alone, I said, though my own voice sounded hollow. Nina stopped, staring at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. You don't hear it? The knocking? I froze. What knocking? She pointed toward the window, her hand trembling. Listen. At first, I heard nothing but the whispers. But then, faint and rhythmic, I heard it. A deliberate, steady knock. Don't look, Miguel had warned us. Once you see it, it sees you. But my curiosity overpowered my fear. I crept to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see outside. And there it was. A figure stood on the beach, illuminated by the pale moonlight. Its outline shimmered, its head tilted as if listening. My breath caught as I recognized the stance, the faint shape of a camera strap across its chest. It was Julia, or what was left of her. Her eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. She didn't move, but her presence was suffocating, as though the air around her was alive. Adrian, Nina whispered, her voice shaking. I turned away from the window, my pulse hammering in my ears. We need to leave. Now! We ran into the jungle, the knocking echoing behind us. The air grew colder as we moved, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the path. Nina clung to my arm, her breath sharp and uneven. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I don't know," I admitted. The whispers swirled around us, louder than ever. I felt them pressing into my thoughts, dragging up memories I had tried to forget. The car accident, the screams, the smell of burning metal. Adrian. The voice was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. It was hers. I stopped, my chest tightening. "Don't," Nina pleaded. "I have to," I said, pulling away from her. The jungle opened into a clearing. At its center was a massive tree, its trunk blackened and twisted. Its roots snaked across the ground like veins, and the air around it pulsed with an unnatural energy. The whispers stopped. I stepped forward, drawn to the tree despite the fear clawing at me. Its bark was etched with glowing symbols that shifted and writhed like living things. Faces appeared in the patterns, distorted and anguished, their hollow eyes staring at me. Adrian. I turned and saw her. Ellie, my ex-wife. But it wasn't really her. Her form flickered, her features blurred, and her eyes burned with the same faint glow as Julia's. "Ellie," I whispered, my voice shaking. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Why did you leave me, Adrian?" "I didn't leave," I said, stepping back. "You told me to go." "You ran," she said, her voice cold. "You've always run." The symbols on the tree flared, and the clearing trembled. Shadows poured from its base, twisting into shapes I recognized, Mike, Julia, even Tom. Their forms flickered like dying flames, their voices joining the chorus. "You ran. You abandoned her. You let her burn." I fell to my knees, the weight of their words crushing me. Nina's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and desperate. "Adrian, don't listen to them." I looked up at her, my vision swimming. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her face pale but defiant. The shadows hesitated, their forms flickering. I turned back to the tree, my hands trembling. "I know what I did," I said, forcing the words out. "I made a mistake. I ran, and I've lived with it every day since." The clearing fell silent, the symbols on the tree dimming. "I'm done running," I said. The shadows dissolved, and the tree pulsed one last time before falling still. The clearing was silent, but the air felt heavier, charged with a tension that made it hard to breathe. The blackened tree stood before me, its twisted trunk pulsating faintly with light. The faces etched into its bark stared down at me, their expressions shifting between anguish and accusation. Nina stood behind me, her breath sharp and uneven. "Adrian, what's happening?" I didn't answer. My gaze was locked on the tree, on the faint light that seemed to ripple through its surface like a heartbeat. The whispers were gone now, replaced by a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Then the ground beneath me shifted, and I stumbled. The air shimmered, and for a moment, it felt as though the world around me was folding in on itself. The jungle dissolved, replaced by a dark, featureless void. The only things that remained were the tree, Nina, and me. "What is this?" Nina's voice trembled. "It's the island," I said, though I didn't fully understand what I meant. The hum grew louder, and the tree began to change. Its bark rippled and twisted, the glowing symbols rearranging themselves into new shapes. At the base of the trunk, a dark void appeared, a gaping, endless chasm that radiated cold. Then the voice came. "Adrian." It wasn't a whisper this time. It was clear, resonant, and painfully familiar. Ellie stepped out from the shadows, her figure flickering like a reflection on water. She looked the same as she had the day I last saw her, but her eyes glowed faintly, and her movements were unnaturally fluid. "Ellie," I said, my voice cracking. She tilted her head, her expression both sad and accusing. "Why did you leave me, Adrian?" "I didn't leave you," I said, taking a step back. "You asked me to go. You gave up," she said, her tone cutting through me like a knife. "When things got hard, you walked away, just like you always do." The symbols on the tree flared, and I heard the voices again, Mike, Julia, even Tom. They were faint at first, then louder, overlapping in a chilling chorus. You ran. You abandoned her. You let her burn. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the voices filled my mind. Adrian. Nina's voice broke through the chaos, sharp and desperate. I looked up to see her standing near the edge of the void, her face pale but determined. You don't have to listen to them, she said. They're trying to break you. The figures of Mike, Julia, and Tom appeared in the shadows, their forms flickering like dying embers. They stared at me, their glowing eyes filled with something between pity and condemnation. Ellie stepped closer, her voice softer now. You can stop running, Adrian. You can make it right. The ground trembled, and the void at the base of the tree grew wider. You can save them, Ellie said, gesturing toward the shadows of our friends. But only if you give the island what it wants. What does it want? I asked, though I already knew. Eles gazed at Mina. You. The hum grew louder, and the void pulsed with a cold, unnatural energy. I turned to Nina, who was staring at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. Don't do this, she said, her voice breaking. We can figure something else out. There has to be another way. There isn't, I said, my voice heavy. This is why it let me live. It wasn't done with me. I stepped toward the void, the pull growing stronger with each step. The shadows of Mike, Julia, and Tom moved closer, their forms becoming more solid, more human. You don't have to do this, Nina said, grabbing my arm. I do, I said, gently pulling away. It's my fault they're here. I have to fix it. The tree's light grew brighter, the faces on its surface writhing in silent agony. The hum became a deafening roar, and the void seemed to stretch out before me, endless and hungry. Adrian, Ellie said, her voice calm. Are you ready? I nodded, though fear clawed at me. I took a step into the void. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the air around me changed. It was cold, so cold it felt like it was slicing through my skin. The darkness swallowed me, and the roar of the tree faded into silence. I was floating now, weightless and untethered. The void wasn't empty. It was alive, filled with whispers and shadows that brushed against me like cold fingers. You chose this, the voices said, their tone neither cruel nor kind. Yes, I whispered. The shadows shifted, forming into familiar shapes. I saw Mike, his cocky grin replaced by a look of quiet relief. Julia, her camera hanging at her side, nodded at me with a faint smile. Tom stood behind them, his expression unreadable but calm. You saved us, Julia said, her voice echoing in the void. Not yet, I said. Go. They hesitated for a moment, then turned and walked away, their forms dissolving into the shadows. As they disappeared, the void began to close in around me. The cold intensified, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. But I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in years, I felt free. I don't know how much time passed in the void. Minutes? Hours? It felt like both an instant and an eternity. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on the beach. The sky was streaked with pink and orange, the first light of dawn spilling over the horizon. The air was warm and salty, and the sound of waves filled the silence. Nina was beside me, her face streaked with tears. You're alive, she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, though I didn't feel alive. Not entirely. The island was quiet now. The whispers were gone, and the oppressive weight that had lingered since we arrived had lifted. Mike, Julia, and Tom were nowhere to be seen. They're gone, Nina said, her voice soft. You saved them. I stared out at the horizon, the sun rising over the water. I had saved them, but at a cost. The island hadn't taken me completely, but it had marked me. I could still feel it. Santerosa pressing at the edges of my mind. It was quiet now, but I knew it wasn't done with me. Not yet. Let's go, I said, my voice steady. We boarded the ferry in silence, leaving the island behind. But as the shoreline disappeared into the distance, I heard it again. A faint whisper carried on the breeze. Adrian. The ferry's engine hummed steadily as it carried us away from Santerosa. I stood at the stern, staring back at the shrinking silhouette of the island. The jungle was barely visible now, shrouded in early morning mist, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the island was watching me. Nina sat on a bench nearby, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't said much since we boarded, and I didn't blame her. I didn't know what to say either. The other passengers, a mix of tourists and locals, moved about the ferry as though nothing was wrong. I envied their ignorance. They didn't know what the island was, what it could do. But I did. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. For a moment, I hesitated before pulling it out. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "You made the right choice." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. The message didn't make sense. Who could have sent it? The staff? Miguel? Or was it the island itself, somehow reaching out even now? I deleted the message, shoving the phone back into my pocket. It didn't matter. When we docked at the mainland, the world felt jarringly normal. People bustled around us, loading luggage and greeting loved ones. It was loud and chaotic in a way that made me feel like I was moving underwater. Nina and I didn't say much as we made our way to a small hotel near the harbor. She checked us in, her voice hollow, and handed me a room key without looking at me. "Get some rest," she said before disappearing into her room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My mind replayed everything that had happened. The whispers, the tree, the void. The faces of Mike, Julia, and Tom haunted me, their glowing eyes a constant reminder of what I'd done. But I couldn't bring myself to regret it. That night, I dreamed of the island. I was back in the clearing, standing before the blackened tree. Its bark was etched with glowing symbols, and its roots stretched out like veins, pulsing faintly. "You're free," the tree's voice said, resonating through the clearing. But as I turned to leave, I saw them. Mike, Julia, and Tom stood at the edge of the clearing, their forms flickering like candlelight. They didn't speak, but their eyes followed me as I walked away. I woke with a start, my chest tight. The room was dark, but the faint sound of whispers lingered, just at the edge of hearing. I sat up, my hands trembling. "It's over," I whispered to myself. "It's over." But deep down, I knew the island wasn't done with me. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to normal life, but it was impossible. The memories of Santerosa clung to me, creeping into my thoughts at the most unexpected moments. I'd hear the whispers in crowded places, faint but unmistakable. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. And then there were the dreams. Every night, I dreamed of the island. Sometimes it was the beach, with its endless horizon and soft, rhythmic waves. Other times, it was the jungle, dense and suffocating, the whispers growing louder with every step. But always it ended with the tree. Nina called me once, weeks after we'd left the island. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice strained. "I'm managing," I said, though it wasn't entirely true. "You?" There was a long pause before she answered. "I keep thinking about them. Mike, Julia, Tom. Do you think they're okay?" I didn't know how to respond. "I think they're at peace now." Another pause. "And you? Are you at peace?" I didn't answer, and she didn't press. That was the last time we spoke. Months passed, and I started to rebuild my life. Or at least I tried. I took a new job, moved to a new city, and told myself I was moving on. But the island wouldn't let me go. It started with the letters. The first one arrived on an ordinary afternoon, tucked between bills and advertisements. The envelope was plain, unmarked except for my name scrawled across the front. Inside was a photograph of Santerosa. It was taken from the ferry dock, the same view I'd had when we first arrived. The island looked exactly as it had that day, pristine, inviting a paradise. But in the corner of the photo, just barely visible, was a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the jungle. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, a coincidence. But then the second letter came. This time it was a map, a crude sketch of the island, with a black X marking a spot deep in the jungle. Beneath it, a single word was written. Return. I didn't want to go back. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away, to burn the letters and forget they ever existed. But the pull was undeniable. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it deep in my chest, a need to return, to finish what I'd started. And so, 2 weeks later, I found myself standing on the ferry dock once again, staring out at the distant silhouette of Santerosa. The island was waiting for me. The ferry ride back to Santerosa felt different. The first time, the island had shimmered on the horizon, a beacon of beauty and escape. This time, it loomed like a shadow, its jungle dark and oppressive even from a distance. I stood at the bow, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. The other passengers, tourists mostly, laughed and snapped photos, oblivious to the danger they were sailing toward. I envied their ignorance. The letters had left me no choice. The photo, the map, the single, haunting word, return. I had tried to resist, to ignore the island's pull, but the whispers followed me, growing louder each day. Every night, I dreamed of the tree, its twisted roots and glowing symbols burning into my mind. I had to go back. When I stepped onto the dock, the air felt heavier, thicker. The staff greeted me with the same wide smiles and garlands as before, but their eyes betrayed something else. They recognized me. "Welcome back, Mr. Adrian," one of them said, her tone polite but distant. I nodded, brushing past her. I didn't need the formalities. I knew where I was going. The map from the second letter was seared into my memory. It showed a path through the jungle, leading to a spot deeper than I'd ever ventured before. The X marked something I didn't know what, but I felt its pull like a hook in my chest. I left the resort without telling anyone. No point. The staff wouldn't stop me, and there was no one left who would care. The jungle was just as I remembered it, dense and suffocating, its air heavy with moisture and the faint scent of decay. The whispers returned as soon as I entered, faint at first, but growing louder with every step. "Adrian," I pushed forward, ignoring the way the shadows seemed to stretch and shift around me. The path was narrow and winding, marked by roots that jutted out like skeletal fingers. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I couldn't tell. Time felt strange here, like it bent and twisted in the island's presence. And then I found it. The tree. It was even larger than I remembered, its trunk rising like a dark monolith against the jungle canopy. The symbols etched into its bark glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the whispers that surrounded me. But something was different. The void at its base was gone, replaced by a single opening in the trunk, a doorway, dark and beckoning. My stomach twisted, but I stepped closer. As I neared the opening, I saw the faces again. They pressed against the bark, their features distorted in agony, their eyes hollow. Mike, Julia, Tom, they were all there, and they were watching me. "You came back," Mike's voice said, soft and distant. "Why?" Julia's voice followed, sharper, filled with pain. I stopped, my hands trembling. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I could save you." "You can't," Tom said, his tone flat. "We're part of the island now, just like you will be." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't belong here." The whispers grew louder, the tree's light flaring. "Don't you?" The doorway in the tree pulsed with light, and I felt the pull again, stronger this time. "I have to go in," I said, though the words felt hollow. "No, you don't." Nina's voice broke through the noise, sharp and desperate. I spun around, my breath catching. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, her face pale but determined. "Nina, how did you? You think you can fix this by giving yourself to the island?" she shouted, stepping closer. "That's not how this works." I stared at her, my mind racing. "Then how do I stop it?" "You don't," she said. "The island doesn't want you dead, Adrian. It wants you broken. It wants you to carry its weight forever." Her words hit me like a blow. She was right. The whispers, the dreams, the guilt. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about control. The tree's light flared, and the ground trembled beneath us. "Leave," Nina said, grabbing my arm. "Walk away, Adrian. That's how you win." I hesitated, glancing back at the tree. The doorway seemed to shimmer, its pull almost unbearable. "You can't save them," Nina said softly. "But you can save yourself." I stepped back, away from the tree. The whispers grew frantic, their tone desperate, pleading. "Adrian." But I kept walking, Nina's hand gripping mine as we left the clearing. The jungle seemed to resist us, the shadows stretching and twisting to block our path. The whispers clawed at my mind, but I pushed forward, one step at a time. When we finally broke through the trees and onto the beach, the air felt lighter, freer. The ferry was waiting. As the boat pulled away from the dock, I stood at the stern, watching the island shrink into the horizon. The whispers were gone, replaced by the steady hum of the engine and the soft crash of waves. "Do you think it's over?" Nina asked, standing beside me. I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew the truth. The island never truly lets go. As the shoreline disappeared, I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest. A whisper, faint and distant, carried on the wind. "Adrian." The island had spared me, but I would carry its mark forever. Weeks passed after leaving Santerosa, but the island refused to leave me. Its whispers crept into my dreams. Its presence lingered in my mind. Even in the busiest streets of the city, I felt the jungle's shadow pressing against me, just out of sight. Nina and I didn't speak often after we returned. She called a few times, sent me messages, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there to say? That the island still haunted me? That the guilt hadn't faded? One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, unmarked, but as soon as I saw it, I knew where it had come from. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a photograph of the island, taken from the ferry dock. The jungle was shrouded in mist, its edges blurred as though the camera itself had hesitated to capture it. In the corner of the photo, just visible among the trees, was a shadow. I turned the photo over, finding a single line scrawled on the back. "It never ends." Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I'd love to hear your comments.